I think I can confidently say that the Nintendo Famicom is the most versatile piece of gaming hardware that has ever existed. This isn't to say that the actual hardware is particularly special, but rather that it was extremely popular. With popularity comes imitation, and with imitation comes cheapification. Around the time that unlicensed development for Famicom cartridges had started to wane, prevalent clone manufacturer UMC had successfully condensed the entirety of the Famicom hardware onto a single package, commonly referred to as the NES on a chip. This innovation meant that you could fit the NES into just about anything, and by God did clone manufacturers seize the opportunity. These mostly came in the form of plug-and-play controllers with preloaded games, but this was just the tip of the iceberg. Light guns, fishing rods, handhelds, penguins, you name it, and there was probably a Famiclone version of it somewhere. This was a whole new industry filled with developers that already had experience with the legacy hardware. All they needed were new game ideas. And just as this new plug-and-play industry had started to take form, a new video game genre was taking the world by storm. The popularity of rhythm games during the time that I was growing up cannot be overstated. When I was growing up, it was all about Guitar Hero and Rock Band, and you couldn't walk into any store that sold video games without spotting at least one massive display of plastic rhythm game peripherals. On the plug-and-play front, however, most manufacturers had already moved past Famiclones by this point. At best, you got 16-bit plug-and-plays with crappy MIDI renditions of the songs, and while those can certainly be interesting in themselves, it's not what I intended on looking at today. For that, we need to go further back. Before Guitar Hero took over the genre in the West, and slightly after Parappa the Rapper more or less got it started, it was Konami who really pioneered the rhythm game genre with Beat Mania. Following this success, their newly named Mania division churned out all sorts of experimental rhythm games. While they're all solid in their own right, none made quite as much noise as Dance Dance Revolution. In case you're not familiar, it's more or less your standard 4-note rhythm game, but controlled with your feet. This combination of addictive gameplay, physical intensity, banger music, and the sheer novelty of it all took the world by storm, and soon enough, a home version would be developed. However, you can't really sell a giant, expensive dance pad and expect most people to bring that thing into their home. So they devised a more economical solution, the soft pad. It's essentially a set of flexible foam pads with some conductive material inside that gets smushed together when you step on it. The soft pads served as a cheap and convenient, if a tad bit compromised way to bring DDR to the living room. However, if you didn't already have a PlayStation, this would still be quite the investment just to play one game. But hold on, do you notice that little head unit at the top of the soft pad? This is the part that stores all the electrical components. In theory, if you could house an entire game console in this box, then you wouldn't need to buy a console at all. Now, if only there was a gaming technology available in 1999 that was cheap and small enough. If only. And thus, a whole wave of Famiclone dance mats was born. And that's definitely right up my alley, so let's take a look, shall we? There's just a couple things that I thought I should mention before jumping into these games. One thing that you'll probably come to learn in future videos is that I really like to play games with something similar to their intended peripherals whenever possible. I'm not a collector of bootleg items by any means, but when it comes to plug-and-plays, I've started to amass a bit of a collection. I just find that I'm not really getting the full experience if I'm emulating special games like this and just using a controller or keyboard. But on the other hand, I have limited space, and I'm not about to buy 10 DDR plug-and-plays just for this one video. And that's if I could even get my hands on them, since very few notable examples appear to have been released in the United States. But I have a solution. A trip to AliExpress and $7 later, and I'm now the proud owner of USB wired dance mats, non-slip, dancing pad, footprint, move step, arcade game, fitness dancer blanket for PC, laptop, video games. And if that doesn't smell like quality to you, I don't know what does.
God. Oh, the smell, it's just so, like, plasticky.
Second, this is my first DDR experience. It's not like I haven't had a chance to play it in the arcade, but as someone who's self-conscious about my everything in public spaces, I just haven't seized the opportunity. So I hope you'll enjoy watching someone who's never played DDR before learn the ropes in the worst way possible. With all that being said, let's dance. Starting off with one of the most famous examples, this is Street Dance. More specifically, this is the original 2000 version from Inventor. Yeah, the same people who gave us such gems as F-22 and Rescue Cuck graced us with this disaster piece. We're starting off strong with a rendition of Smile DK's Butterfly. I think DDR is partially responsible for the song being everywhere on cheap electronics in the 2000s, and we can already see that in effect here. Once we're past the title screen, we're greeted with an extremely basic music selection screen. I've got to knock off some points for not being able to preview the music before we select it. I'll be honest, I have extremely limited knowledge when it comes to music,
God, what does she know about?
but I guess I'll have to make this work. I will give some points back for this dude breathing fire though, that's rad as hell. Alright, might as well hop into the first song, TikTok. Alright, I'm not sure what TikTok is supposed to be, but I know Butterfly when I hear it. Alright, whatever, maybe choosing Butterfly will get me the right song. That's nothing. Okay, this song selection is all messed up. Despite the multiple pages of songs suggesting that this game is packed with content, it's actually just these 7 songs followed by 3 blanks on every page, and every song is labeled incorrectly. Wonderful. Jumping back into the game, and this is certainly an experience. Not only does it cycle between a bunch of backgrounds that are varying levels of distracting, but we also get to see a wide variety of dancers who rock out to the jams for a couple seconds before getting vaporized. Among these dancers is Jar Jar Binks, straight out of the freshly released Phantom Menace. It's always nice to see beloved characters in these games. The background selection appears to be random, and by that I mean really random. Like, there are clearly a couple backgrounds that are intended for some sort of tutorial, but there's no actual tutorial in the game. I figure that these are supposed to show up during some sort of a track screen, but they're just sort of in the normal background rotation. These details aren't really something you'll notice once you start playing though, because you'll be too busy trying to keep up to divert your attention anywhere else. This isn't something I'd paid attention to when I messed around with this game on a keyboard before, but these charts are insane for a beginner. This was the first game I chose to play, and on the very first song I'm already getting hit with back-to-back simultaneous notes. I know that these are probably techniques that you learn early on, but keep in mind, this is my first time ever trying to use a DDR mat. The keen-eyed among you may have realized that I'm playing the game in PAL speed here, which aside from being the intended region from the game should in theory give me a bit of a speed handicap, but I'm still fighting for my life here. The charts also don't seem to match up with the music much at all. There's moments where it seems like it might be matching up, but this illusion is quickly shattered when the music loops and you're just awkwardly hitting notes in dead silence for a second.
Oh, just loop the song, alright.
As such, it doesn't really feel like I'm dancing to the music as much as I'm trying to stomp notes with my feet while some unrelated music plays. This probably also contributes to the difficulty that I had with this, as I couldn't really depend on the rhythm of the music to guide me. As for the actual gameplay, it seems fine to me. You wouldn't really know it from my awful performance, but the hit detection seems fairly accurate and responsive. This is also a lot more forgiving than most DDR games, since it marks every note you hit as good so long as you don't completely miss it, whereas most rhythm games are really particular and rank the timing of each of your inputs. This is counteracted by these charts for someone of my skill level though. I got 51% on my first earnest attempt at Butterfly, and that's only after having warmed up with an easier game, because I knew that this game was too hard for me and gave up on my first actual attempt. Not sure what the smoker banner is all about. And the music is unique. It uses Sunsoft's sound engine, complete with that iconic Sunsoft bass. It's not incredible, but I don't think it's offensive either. It's just aggressively average. I'd probably think lower of it had they not used that Sunsoft bass though. Of course all the music is mislabeled, so you don't really know what you're in for until you've chosen a song, but you can definitely infer what some of these songs are meant to be from their renditions. It's mostly just pop songs, but there's also the odd inclusion of a dance remix of My Heart Will Go On from the Titanic movie, which is actually one of the better covers on here. It's pretty lame to only have 7 songs, but I think we're missing some context here. This was only spelled out to me in a huge update to the list of inventor games on the Bootleg Games wiki, which happened after I started writing this video, but this doesn't appear to be a genuine dump from a plug and play. Don't get me wrong, it's definitely a legit game that Inventor made, but this was likely leaked online sometime in the 2000s, possibly from someone adjacent to the industry. This was surprisingly common back in the day. Another Inventor-developed demo known as Music Box was also leaked online by Mac Joe, a former member of Super Game who now runs the handheld console developer Ambernick. It's a small world. So yeah, I don't think this version was ever intended to be released to the public. I had originally written that this was a straight up scam, but I guess I need to lighten up on it a bit. It's fine as a proof of concept, but it clearly had a long way to go before it was ready for release. It's possible that it eventually released in a finished form, but until that release surfaces somewhere, I think it's likely that this iteration never got the proper attention that it deserved. It's a shame because the potential was clearly there. And thankfully, this wouldn't be the last that we would see of Street Dance. Now this is what I know you've been waiting for. It's legendary, it's iconic, it's Hitmouse. It's fine. Street Dance. This is the updated 2008 version, believed to have been made by Nice Code Software. The most obvious change made to this version is that it features fully sampled music, which I'm gonna keep talking over before completely muting in the vain hopes that this video gets to keep its monetization. There's more to this version than initially meets the eye though. For starters, the charts are way easier from the get-go and actually seem to match up with the music. I was actually able to clear some of these songs with about 70% accuracy. The visuals are basically the same, but they thankfully made it so that each song only sticks to one background instead of cycling through them. I will say that having more manageable charts makes it a lot easier to notice the smaller nuances with the gameplay. For example, this game seems to really favor hitting the notes early. If you hit them right on time, as you'd normally be encouraged to do in a rhythm game, you're more likely to miss the note. So what this translates to is playing slightly off rhythm instead of actually trying to time your movements as accurately as possible. This version is also a lot more honest with its song roster. Sure, the number of unique titles here is cut down significantly, but the names actually match up to the songs here. You might be inclined to think that they just duplicated them to pad out the list like with the 2000 version, but you'd be wrong. These songs with numbers at the end are actually different difficulty levels. It's sort of a clumsy solution, but I'd much rather have this over the single absurd difficulty level in the original. All of these changes, combined with the ability to back out of a song at any time by pressing select, come together to make this feel a lot more like a finished product. It loses some style points for using stolen sampled music, but like 99.9% of the target audience would have preferred it this way. I think that their method of playing the music might have had a fairly significant performance impact though, as this game seems to have some pretty nasty slowdown at times. This manifests in the music playback becoming really staticky when there are too many notes on screen. It's not great. The person in charge of digitizing this music probably should have been paying a bit more attention though, because they accidentally left the DDR announcer at the end of Hero. The hell, man, I didn't do that bad. But overall, this is certainly a lot more of a complete package than the 2000 version. I mean, considering that this one was actually sold to customers, it better be. This is essentially what would have happened if you took the 2000 version and buttoned it up, although I think it would have been a bit better if Nice Code went the extra mile and added new features like a proper difficulty selector. As it stands, it really feels like they just cobbled together existing assets, which is basically because that's pretty much what they did. I could see this being a pretty decent introduction to DDR for someone who's never played it before, but I don't think that it would come close to scratching the itch for someone who's already played DDR and couldn't afford a PlayStation or something. This is a novelty above all else, both at the time and now. As embarrassing as it is to say, I'm already exhausted. I also need to charge my camera, so let's switch gears while I cool off. Ever wanted to play DDR with a controller? Well, you're in luck. While yes, this isn't an outlandish concept, with Konami themselves having dabbled with the Game Boy entries in the series along with a couple novelty controllers, you should already know that we're not getting anything creative like that here. You're playing with a standard gamepad and you're gonna like it. I'd like to clarify that I'm aware that playing with a gamepad is a popular and accessible way to play. This was just silly framing to segue into this next batch of games. First up is the Pokemon 4-in-1 cartridge. This is a collection of 4 Pikachu-themed minigames, which somehow all managed to misspell Pikachu's name. Like, that's not even close. We've got one of those slot machine games, a clone of Same Game where you need to eliminate the threat to humanity that is the Opera browser, and a painfully slow clone of Pac-Man that looks a lot like the original NES version, but appears to have been made from scratch. I always found it weird when developers did this. Like, was this actually more efficient than just stealing the game? But the final game on the list, Pika Dance, seems to be where most of the effort went. You'd expect the music to at least be from Pokemon or something given the theme of the collection, but you'd be wrong. I'm sure you already know what the first track is. Jumping into the game, and this is adorable. In place of the arrows from a standard DDR game, we have Pokeballs at the top and different rotating Pokemon ascending the board. I love the little bug-eyed expression that they get when they're sucked into the Pokeball. The visuals are also refreshingly simple coming from that first version of Street Dance. Just a color-changing background and a portrait of Pikachu that cheers you on or gets pissed depending on your performance. Every game should be like this if you ask me. The music here isn't as extravagant as Street Dance, but it's nice enough. This was developed by Mars Production, and I think they used Weijing's sound engine as they frequently develop games for them. I've always found these instruments to give off a cozy vibe, I don't know how to describe it. The biggest problem is that, like most of the other games in this video, this was primarily released in PAL regions, but the music doesn't seem to reflect that. When switching the emulator's region to NTSC, the BPM seems to more closely match the original songs. In PAL speed, it sounds like something you'd hear in an elevator, but alas, I'm playing these games at their original speed to avoid getting a huge essay about the integrity of the emulator that I'm using. And the speed difference is reflected in the game's difficulty too. It's not surprising given that this game also has the issue of notes being placed without any discernible rhyme or reason, but the slow speed and sparse placement makes this game extremely easy on a controller. There also aren't any difficulty options, so in total this package only has 3 songs with 1 chart each. Butterfly is almost painfully easy even at 60Hz, but things start to pick up a bit in the latter 2 songs. The last song still isn't difficult though, and the only way I could see someone failing is if they were playing on a keyboard with their preferred control mapping, only to find out that this game is unlike every other DDR game on the console and uses both the D-pad and the face buttons. Couldn't be me. But this made sense as soon as I put this in the context of a controller, which I really should have been using anyway. The later songs have simultaneous inputs like left or right or up and down, which would be impossible to do on a normal D-pad since it has a ball pivot that was designed to prevent exactly that. Apart from having to commit the sinful act of mapping my emulator to use WASD as the arrow keys so I wouldn't get confused, I'm a fan of this decision. And now I know that whoever wrote this line on the Bootleg Games wiki probably didn't even play the game and just wrote it based on a gameplay video or something. Let me fix that real quick. Every song shares the same high score table for some reason, which doesn't really make sense as the amount of notes varies between songs. And get a load of those initials, that's a bit on the nose, don't you think? There's also this hacked version called Pet 4-in-1 that sort of hastily disguises all of the copyrighted materials, with Pet Dance here taking the biggest hit. All the music is just numbered, and the Pokemon notes have been replaced with up arrows, which is more confusing than you'd think. Why would you do that? But yeah, the Pokemon version is actually a pretty decent little package. The slots game is pretty useless, but the rest of the games are pretty decent time wasters. Moving on. Oh hell yeah. This is Finger DDR, developed by Hummer Team. As the title suggests, this is yet another game that's DDR inspired, but wasn't meant to be played with a dance pad. You're never gonna believe this, but the music in this one is... And the visuals here are some of the most bizarre I've seen so far. It's just the most random assortment of objects and animations scrolling by. Like yeah, there's the expected dancing girl and generic spinning animations, but then there's a moped, a cactus, toothpaste, and whatever the hell is going on here. What's the theme here? There's also this little character that moves around depending on what button you're pressing. I guess the intent here is that you're controlling this character, who is in turn playing DDR with their feet. I guess that's one way to go about simulating the DDR experience. At first I thought it was just this little baby Chun-Li character, but it turns out that you can restart the song by pressing start, and doing so will cycle between different characters. So we've got Chun-Light, Hippo, Frog, and Penguin. There are also graphics for Hello Kitty and Pikachu in the files, but these don't seem to have been used in any version of the game. Bizarrely, both this game and Pet 4-in-1 were first spotted on Power Joy consoles. They must have really liked this genre of dubiously legal, not quite DDR games. The actual gameplay area here has some pretty flashy animations, but they really couldn't have used different colors here for the notes in the background. There were clearly enough colors to go around here. And yet again, this is one of those clones where the notes don't really correspond with the music at all. I'm not saying that you need to match every note up to the song perfectly, but if you're gonna deviate in some way, it should at least make some sense. But the note patterns here just feel completely random. I will say though, I'm a huge fan of this cover of the song, but it's just a really short remix of the chorus. I wish there was more, but if you think that the short song means a short and sweet game, you'd be wrong. It's like 2.5 minutes straight of this, and when you finish, it just loops. This is what I'd call multi-cart fodder at its most blatant. Having grown up with consoles like the one this appeared on, I know that I probably would have just ended up getting bored and resetting the console before even getting close to the loop. But hey, it's another game on the list, that means we can put a bigger number on the box. This game is just really weird. It feels like it was supposed to be a part of something bigger that was never finished, and it just ended up being unceremoniously dropped onto Power Joy consoles later on. And this wouldn't be the only Hummer Team game to get this fate. There's no less than 4 Hummer Team games that were clearly meant to be played on a dance pad and were never released in their original form, only to later show up on consoles produced by Trump Grand. Among these are 2 games that showed up alongside Finger DDR on a couple Power Joy consoles, a soccer game that as far as I can tell only surfaced in the late 2010s, and an entirely separate DDR game called Dance Y2K that was never finished and had to be data mined out of a Power Joy console. This one was clearly a lot more ambitious than Finger DDR, but it's even earlier in development and completely lacks music. I'm itching to talk about more surrounding this bizarre batch of games, but I've already got them set aside for a much larger video, which if we're lucky, I'll finally get around to writing before I die of old age. So stay tuned for that. Okay, I think that's enough time spent playing games with my hands like a loser. Time to get back on my feet. And now we're heading into what I'd consider to be the main event. This is Hot Dance 2000. Not familiar with it? How about GLK Dance? Or Revolution 2000X? Or Dance Extreme? Or Hot 2000? Or Hot Dance with Samba? Or basically, if you're familiar with any of these Famiclone DDR games, you've probably seen at least some variant of the specific game. There must be like 100 of them across different regions. I'll mainly be focusing on Hot Dance 2000 as it has the most content of the bunch, but I'll reference some of the other variants as needed. Before we really get deep into this one, let's check out what games it has to offer. If you haven't caught on already, these dance pads typically come with a few bonus games that add more value to the package, and in this case, we've got a whopping 4. First up is Hit Mouse. Okay, I know we just played this one, but I might as well try it again just to warm up. It's been a while after all. Oh, never mind I guess. This is entirely different. It's still a whack-a-mole game, of course. I'm starting to notice a theme here. Now I want to know, who copied who here? You might see this game referred to as the Knockout game on different variants, but Hot Dance seems to use the same name as Nice Code's game. This version is a bit slower than that one, but it more than makes up for it with the music. You'll probably notice in the footage that I'm struggling to hit these spots in the corner here. Despite most Hot Dance variants using a standard DDR soft pad clone, which includes A and B buttons, for some reason this one game maps those corner inputs to start and select instead, which are way further in the corner. Sure, whatever. Next up is Pinball. This is just straight up NES pinball. They didn't even bother to hide it. They didn't bother to change the controls either, so this is actually really clumsy to play on a dance mat. The flippers are controlled with the left and right directional buttons, so I found it easier to stand duck-footed and tap the pads with my toes than to constantly stumble back and forth. Definitely not the most comfortable way to play pinball, but I'm sure there are worse ways to play though. I couldn't manage to get there with the pads, so I had to go back and make sure that the Donkey Kong reference was still intact, and sure enough, it is. I'm sure Nintendo was cool with it though. Those two games are the ones that come with the majority of these DDR pads, but Hot Dance 2000 is all about value for money, so we have 2 lovely bonus games here. First up is Pin Pan. It's Arkanoid. I couldn't get this one to work at first. I was about to chalk this up to the developers not testing it, but while I was testing this game again to write the script, I noticed that the emulator that I'm using automatically switches to the Arkanoid paddle when it detects Arkanoid loading up. Thanks for that. So in theory, this should work just about as well as Pinball, but I'm not setting up the pad again just to test Arkanoid. I have my limits. And finally, we have Pac-Man. You know those mobile versions of Pac-Man where you have to swipe to control the character? Imagine that, but 10 times less responsive and controlled with your feet. Now imagine doing that while sweating. It's not great. Alright, fine, let's play this stupid dancing game. The song selection is the real draw to Hot Dance 2000. While most other versions cap out at 12 or 24 songs, this one has a whole 33, and it's not like the 2000 version of Street Dance. These songs are actually all different songs with proper labels. Labels aren't always correct, but at least you can use them to identify the damn songs. One thing that bugs me about most of these releases is that, much like Street Dance, you don't get to hear the song before you pick it. This is rectified in some releases, but most of them have you pick in dead silence. Doesn't really get you in the mood, you know? I know that they're not going to be for everyone, but these renditions are kind of incredible. There's something about this weird twangy sound engine that the developers used. I should hate it, but I've kind of fallen in love with it over time. It's the same way I feel about Hummer Team's sound engine. You can identify these developers by a mile away based on the music alone, and there's something here for everyone, with hits such as the obligatory Butterfly, Hero, Michael Jackson's Beat It, and is that another My Heart Will Go On remix? When it comes to the gameplay though, well, it's not very good. Like sure, it functions. If you learn the timing, you can even hit the notes with a decent level of accuracy, but said timing doesn't really feel intuitive, and it's way too strict. Much like Street Dance, you basically have to hit the notes before they reach the arrows up top, but not too soon or else you'll miss. And if you hit slightly after the perfect window, if you hit slightly after the prefect timing window, then you miss the note entirely. So basically this game only ever lets you go too early. They also swapped the positions of the up and down arrows for some reason. I'm sure this would already trip up most seasoned DDR players, but as this was one of my first DDR experiences, this actively poisoned my perception of where these notes were supposed to be. I genuinely struggled with these 2 notes on every other game that didn't mess up their position for this reason. And for some reason, once you get to song 22, the game changes? The visualizer completely changes, You aren't judged on your timing until the song's over, and the notes don't disappear until they hit the top of the screen. It's not any more or less responsive, but it's just odd. My best guess is that these songs were ported directly from a different release of the game that had an updated version of the engine, but I don't really have any way of confirming that. Speaking of later releases, if I had heard that a game released with so many variants that we literally cannot keep count of them, I'd assume that most of the variants would play exactly the same. I mean, they're all on the same hardware, from the same developer, and they all have the same renditions of the same songs. But I'd be wrong! I'd say that these releases could be grouped into 3 distinctive categories: early, middle, and late. The early releases include those like Hot Dance 2000 and Revolution 2000X. They have fairly crude visualizers and match the gameplay that I've just described. The middle category includes games like Dance Extreme and Dance Master 3. It has a visualizer that more closely resembles a proper DDR game, and the order of the notes has been corrected. I'd say that the timing on this one feels a little bit better when you play on a keyboard, but something starts to feel very wrong once you try to play it with your feet. You see, this game expects you to press the correct arrow and only the correct arrow at any given time. If you have your foot on left and don't move it off the pad when you go to press up, the game will reject your input. So basically, one of the key aspects of playing DDR with any sort of proficiency is banned in this game. You have to recenter your foot after every single note press, and are only allowed to press 2 notes at once when the game asks you to. And the notes don't light up when they're pressed, so unless you're constantly looking down to check exactly where your feet are, you're gonna keep missing notes. Keep in mind, this came with a soft pad, so it's already difficult to tell where your feet are. This version is genuinely unplayable on a dance mat if you ask me. This game also adds Perfect to our collection of ways to misspell perfect, and promises 28 songs but only delivers about 10 with multiple repeats. Maybe Boy doesn't suit your fancy, but how about Fellow? So, slight addendum here, while I was editing the video, I found these pictures from Computex 2000 that show a game that I classified in the middle category. So I think that the early and middle categories are more so different variants that sort of coexisted at the same time, and that sort of throws a wrench in this whole timeline thing that I have going on here. But I think it's still interesting to talk about the differences, and I'm not rewriting the entire section. Regardless, this version would end up serving as the basis for the later ones, so I'll consider that middle, whatever. The late category includes most later releases. As far as I can tell, the only one of these that's been dumped is Hot Dance with Samba. This one is a fairly special release. On top of its staggering 24-game multi-cart, composed mostly of those cryptid inventor hacks like Rescue Cuck, Kante Enegi, and Panda Mar, and its single level of difficulty, it also includes this With Samba mode. This version adds 2 extra inputs to the dance board, which are intended to be controlled with a pair of maracas. I'd imagine that this was done to capitalize on Samba de Amigo, and it's not the only game to do this. Inventor also has a pretty obscure maraca release, Jazz Samba, which shares a lot of DNA with street dance as it happens. Anyway, this version of the engine appears to be based on Dance Extreme, but they fixed the issue with multiple pads being pressed, made the buttons light up when they're pressed, and loosened up the timings to the point that it actually plays naturally. From this point onward, I'd say that this is actually a really solid engine. It's too bad that there are a billion releases that make use of the older engines, which I believe were continually put out well after versions that use the latest engine were already on the market. But regardless of the engine, there's one major pain point that goes completely unaddressed across every single version of this game. The charting is absolutely dreadful. How often does this train go by? Oh my god. Just like street dance, the notes don't correspond to anything, so I can't depend on the rhythm of the music to judge when the notes are supposed to be pressed. Regardless of the difficulty level, the scroll speed is slow and the note placement is nonsensical. The only difference is that the note patterns get more annoying as you turn up the difficulty, with difficult repetitive motions that still don't correspond to anything. I know that I'm not an experienced player by any measure, so maybe my complaints here aren't totally valid, but this just lacks any sort of flow that you need for a rhythm game in my opinion. I wouldn't be surprised if you told me that these charts were completely randomly generated. Step Mania wasn't a thing quite yet, so they couldn't just lift the charts like modern DDR clones do. While the songs are obviously designed to only be played once, for some reason later versions made it so that the song loops over a second time. This makes the songs go from what I'd consider to be an ideal length to well overstaying their welcome in my opinion. I appreciate that a lot of the songs have specially themed visualizers, such as Butterfly being decorated with butterflies, but some songs like My Heart Will Go On have visualizers that are just so plain. There's also this audio visualizer thing, but it sort of just twitches in place. The later versions tightened up on the graphics quite a bit, but one thing that's common across basically all of these versions is that some visualizers just assault your eyes with flashing colors. Some variants of the game will tone down the flashing, but some of them seem to make it more intense. I guess overstimulation just sort of comes with the territory. Another particular pain point for me is that there isn't really any sort of sense of accomplishment when you finish a song. You're given a ranking at the end, sure, but the song isn't marked as completed or anything. You have this giant pool of songs to play, but there's not really any sense of progression. This might be a weird complaint, but it sort of makes me question what the point of playing this is. The quality of the charts doesn't intrinsically motivate me to keep playing, that's for sure. Some releases aim to address this with mixes. There are usually only a few of these thrown into the song list, but Hot Dance 2000 specifically has a dedicated section with 33 whole mixes. These are basically just 2 or 3 songs played back to back, but my main issue here is that you don't really know what you're getting into. It's just a few random, unlabeled songs. I guess it could be a fun mystery for some, but I'd appreciate it if they had proper labels. I'd say that Hot Dance 2000 falls a lot closer to Street Dance 2000 than the 2008 version on the quality scale. It gets bonus points for actually being a finished product, I guess, but aside from enjoying its bizarre covers, I didn't really get anything out of my time with this one. It's shocking to me that these developers managed to pump out so many different variants of this game. You've probably noticed that I keep saying these developers, which would imply that I'm somewhat familiar with them. And indeed, I've talked about one of their games in the past. Remember 99 Layers? In case you haven't watched my last video, this was a clone of a shareware PC game that appeared on the ABL Wicked joystick plug-and-play. And the immediate link between these two is the sound engine. They both have that exact same twangy sound engine, and the composition style is even pretty similar. This is far from definitive proof, but this combined with a few other similarities gives me a hunch that these might have been developed by the same team. And 99 Layers is credited to, drumroll please, unknown developer. Huh. Yeah, these developers didn't really leave any crumbs that we could use to identify them. They had a surprisingly wide reach during their heyday though. Like seriously, they weren't on my radar until after the Challenge 100 video, but they were all over the plug-and-play scene back in the day. So surely, with so many titles under their belt, there has to be something, right? A few other developers including Shenzhen Nanjing Technology made use of the sound engine, which could possibly imply that there is some point of origin from which the sound engine defected. It's not all too uncommon for developers to take their work with them when they move from company to company, or sometimes work just bleeds out to unaffiliated companies. There is one thing I've neglected to mention though. Would you believe me if I said there was yet another version of Hot Dance? Who would have thought? This is Dance 2000, which I believe to be one of the earliest versions of Hot Dance, if not the earliest version. It earned some massive style points for this intro animation, although this seems to bring the console to its knees. The first thing you'll notice is that the menu graphics are even more rudimentary than the versions that came afterward, but some of the song titles haven't been butchered like they were in later releases. The audio meter also works properly in this version, and the characters even dance on the menu in time with the music. That's adorable. The up and down arrows also bizarrely aren't swapped like they are in Hot Dance, and the ranking system seems to behave entirely different from later versions. You basically start with a low ranking and then work your way up to perfect, which you continue to get until you miss a note and have to start over. This version has a few more tricks up its sleeve though. In most of these DDR games, pressing select while in a song will bring you straight back to the menu, which is a pretty convenient feature to have. But in this version, you get this. These are Chinese in-game instructions. This is so cool. Why don't any of the other versions have this? They boot you back to the menu though, so I'm not really sure why these are only accessible when you're already in a song. So maybe you'll see this and think, hey, what happens if I press select on the menu? And there we have it, DDR version 1 copyright by DL. Those are our guys! Except they aren't, because I don't know who the hell DL is. If you look that up, you're more likely to find a way to download this video and 30 other computer viruses than you are to find any reference to the company that made Dance 2000. But there is one more thing. One particularly unusual trait of this game is that it's not using the same mapper as any of the later variants. Pop open the header information and you'll see that it's using NES 2.0 mapper 518, which corresponds to the Subor SB97. Oh, Subor, of course! Back in the 90s, Subor made a name for themselves by distributing their own clone of the Famicom in China, much like Steepler did with the Dendy in Russia. They expanded this market, bizarrely enough, by building educational computers on the Famicom hardware with a built-in keyboard and their own unique software suites. That in itself is definitely a story for another day, but the relevant information here is that specific versions of this educational software, namely version 5, have an uncanny resemblance to these dance games. The system fonts, the sound engine, that distinctive composition style, it all lines up. These versions of the software also have a full staff role, but the only company that's mentioned is Subor themselves. Despite there being no mention of Subor in Dance 2000, it seems pretty clear that these developers had a close relationship with them at some point, possibly as in-house developers that later split off. The information that I'm going to present next is unfortunately nearly impossible to verify, but I believe it's the closest lead we have for identifying our suspect here. In 2017, Discord user Jackson shared their findings from scouring through Chinese corporate databases, and one company popped up that stood out. In a machine translation that was shared, this company is described as having worked on dance blankets, and more importantly, children's language and early education machines, as well as having worked with Xiao Bawang. That's Subor, and the manager that's listed for this company is none other than Cao Weixuan, a co-producer on Subor version 5. I don't know about you, but this company seems to fit the bill pretty well to me. With all of this in mind, it seems very possible that the company we've been looking for is Zhongshan Wanjin Technology. Now sure, this may seem inconsequential. This company is basically untraceable outside of some Chinese company databases that are now largely inaccessible outside of China, but despite this company's obscurity, they left a pretty large mark on the plug-and-play scene. Outside of all of these rhythm games, they're likely the developers behind the later batch of Intellivision plug-and-plays, the mysterious Game Zone 2 arcade ports like Missile Command and Moon Cresta, and a number of games that are closely associated with Jungle Tak from their transitional period between their early UM6578 games and later VT03 games. I find trivia like this so fascinating, and I couldn't believe that such information had been dug up but isn't documented anywhere. Again though, please take this all with a grain of salt, as this is speculation based on quite outdated information and zero first-hand sources. It's not like this team left their educational computer pedigree with Subor either. You know the Knockout game? Turns out that it's built off of a typing minigame, with some versions even reusing the letters to indicate the direction. They continued to produce karaoke games that closely resemble the one found on Subor's computers, and a version of Hot Dance would even make an appearance on Gold Leopard King's computers later on. At some point, it appears that this team established a working relationship with Advanced Bright Limited, as we can see with releases like the Wicked Joystick that I've already mentioned. But the most lucrative product of this partnership was, you guessed it, the dancing games. A lot of the games that I'd mentioned before were most common in Asia and Latin America, but it seems that many of ABL's products managed to get European and US releases. And as we'll come to find, they made some pretty unlikely allies along the way. First up on this list is Double Dance Mania Technolight Edition, released in 2006 by Scenario Entertainment. Scenario was one of those companies that would put out basically anything. I recognize them mostly from their Jungle Tak plug-and-plays that they distributed, and they infamously sold the infringement-heavy 101 plug-and-play in major retailers like Walgreens sometime before their demise. I believe Dance Mania started off as a simple rebranding of one of ABL's standard dance pads, but it eventually sort of grew into its own beast. This Technolight Edition is a result of that, being developed specifically for Scenario. It apparently gets its name from the lighting effects built into the dance mat, which sound fun if a bit excessive. Starting it up, and oh boy, we've got another minigame collection here. There are 6 arcade games and 3 dance games. That seems a little skewed in the wrong direction, don't you think? These games are obviously all intended for 2 players, but I don't think I'd be able to find anyone in a 100-mile radius who'd be down to play Double Dance Mania with me. First up, Asteroid Racers. You play as a space shuttle, and literally all you do is avoid asteroids while this incredibly anxiety-inducing 7-second loop plays. I guess it's a dance pad game, so I'd probably be falling over right now if I had to shoot the enemies, but is this really the best they could do? And when you die, you get this voice. Game over. This is genuinely terrible. Next up, Hip Hop Scotch. This is basically the console's version of Whack-A-Mole, but with a hopscotch theme. I'll give this one points for having a more creative premise. At least they chose something that you actually do with your feet. You have an option for a short, normal, or long game, but even the short mode is a bit long and repetitive in my opinion. Again, the music really doesn't help here. Snowstorm! Oh dear god. This is like a competitive breakout game, but the main problem here is that the ball moves extremely slowly. I don't think a second player would even make this more engaging, since you're mostly at the mercy of the ball and the bricks. There's not really an element of strategy here, this is just like watching paint dry. The music is just as repetitive as ever, but at least it's a more enjoyable loop this time. Next on the list is Duck and Dodge. So this is another whack-a-mole style game, but this one has a twist. You're the one at risk of being whacked. The main objective is to go around and collect these food items that show up, but you can't stay in one place for too long or else you'll get a hammer to the head. I actually kinda like this one, it keeps you on your toes. Certainly a hell of a lot more interesting than any of the other minigames so far. Hurdle Challenge. This one sucks. Maybe I'm just bad, but I genuinely couldn't make it over a single hurdle while trying to play this on the dance pad. And the CPU opponent doesn't appear to be capable of making any mistakes, so if you fail to jump over even a single hurdle, then you might as well restart. And seriously, what's going on with the music loops here? This is a dance pad, give me some jams! And finally, Radium Star. Huh, I wonder what this game is. So if you haven't noticed already, this is one of those VT03 enhanced plug and plays. And given that this company cannot resist NES pinball, they stuck a VT03 enhanced version on this console. This is actually pretty interesting, as you rarely see officially licensed games getting this treatment. This happened way more often on the later VT369 hardware, but I've only seen a few VT03 enhanced games like this. Of course, this has the exact same issue where you have to stand duck-footed to play this game comfortably. At least there's no music in this one. That's kinda sad that I have to say that. Alright, on to the dance games. First up is Firestorm. Wait a second, is this only one song? Hopefully it's at least a playlist or something. Alright, well the music isn't bad. These are quite possibly the least useful note shapes I've seen in one of these games though. And it doesn't help that they've somehow managed to swap the up and down arrows again. How are they still making this mistake 6 years later? Yep, it's only one song. So you buy this entire stupid dance mat that takes up a not insignificant amount of space, and all you get is 3 songs. They're extremely short, too. I know that I commented on some of the previous games going on for a bit too long, but when you've only got 3 songs in the entire package, I'd hope for a little bit more. I think the song in Riptide is a little better than Firestorm's, but Vortex is actually embarrassing. Look, this is the entire song. It's just a loop of that. They really couldn't make 3 entire songs? As for the gameplay, it's pretty much what you'd expect. It's a later version of the engine, so the timing is pretty forgiving. The scroll speed actually changes based on the difficulty, and the charts aren't very annoying. But once again, they don't correspond to the music at all. For such simplistic songs, and such a small number of them at that, I really would have hoped that they could have at least tried in that area. I just can't get over the song selection here. Their previous releases had dozens of pretty decent covers, but they really couldn't muster up 3 songs here. These developers are notorious for adding little jingles in just about everything they do, even when they don't belong. What happened here? This entire package is pathetic. At best, you have like 1.5 decent minigames and 2 passable songs that are extremely short. This is actually one of the worst values I've ever seen in a plug and play. And considering the tripe that comes on some of these things, that's pretty impressive. It really is all flash, but no dash. Alright, now this is where it really starts to get interesting. When talking about plug and plays from the early to mid 2000s, particularly when it comes to Famiclones, one of the most fascinating aspects to me is the number of bizarre licensing agreements that were made. Yep, we're talking about licensed Famiclones again. I think it's just an inevitability at this point. There's actually 2 layers to this. The first one pertains to the music that's featured on these things. Yeah, for these Famiclone plug-and plays with no sampled audio, ABL opted to license songs from Sony and Warner Chappell Music. These most often appeared on Dance Master 3, Twin Dancers, and Croaky Karaoke. They display a copyright screen before each song, which feels so out of place on consoles like these. These licenses must have been extremely cheap, but every single release makes sure to scream that they licensed music from the Sony. Yeah, I'm sure most parents would be swayed upon seeing that you've licensed the Ketchup song. I don't think a single one of these is dumped though, so I haven't gotten to experience them for myself. The second layer, and probably the more bizarre one, involves consoles released with brands and intellectual properties attached to them. Most of these are rebadges of Dance Master 3, with some of them getting custom logos and sprites added into the game if they were feeling fancy. Most companies didn't really seem to have bothered though. As we're well aware, large brands are very particular about who they partner with, so you can probably guess the type of brands that danced with the devil here. You know, brands like Bratz, and Fanta, and Cheese String Cheese. You know what? Sure, fuck it. String cheese dance mat. I don't even care anymore. One of the more interesting brands to have taken the bait was American Idol. You know, the show that's famously about singing. It only made sense for them to enter the dancing genre. They started off small, with the brand being attached to the existing Twin Dancers map from ABL. And the reviews on Amazon from around this time really say all that needs to be said. This release must have been at least kind of successful though, because they'd expand on this line a few years later. Alright, don't get mad at me, but you know how I said I didn't want to buy a bunch of stupid dance mats? Look, I just had to. This one is so stupid. This is American Idol Dance Showdown. They released a few of these, both in single-player and two-player variants. This one is the single-player one, obviously. I knew that these pads couldn't be worth much these days, but I wasn't prepared for just how eager people are to get rid of these things. I spent another $7 before shipping on this one, and aside from some damage on the outer box, I genuinely don't think that this thing has ever been used. And my god, did this thing ever have a new product smell. It's like I opened a pool toy in my room, and that smell lingered for several days, where I sleep. I guess cardboard is really good at locking in 17-year-old rubber fumes. Included in the box is the instruction manual, the dance mat itself, and a set of rubber adhesive pads, which you'll probably want to use because this thing doesn't stay in place nearly as well as the USB pad does. 4 AA batteries later, and we're able to dance just like a real American Idol contestant. So unlike Twin Dancers, which is a straight rebrand of an existing product with no American Idol branding in the game itself, these later American Idol pads appear to have been fully customized with full branding and a unique set of songs. You'd figure that they would have some licensed tracks given that the previous American Idol release really pushed that aspect heavily, but that doesn't seem to be the case this time around. Instead we have songs like Groovin' Beat, It's Electric, and Mambo Moves. Starting off with the first song, and as per usual, I think it's pretty solid, if a bit generic, and not as energetic as their previous song covers. This game is using the newer version of the engine, so the hit detection is as good as it gets, and I finally have the opportunity to test this game with some different songs. It shouldn't come as a surprise that the charting still doesn't correspond to anything and seems pretty random, but these newer charts at least have a reasonable scroll speed and aren't super annoying at high difficulties like the ones in Hot Dance. The visuals are actually pretty reserved in this one with very few rapidly flashing colors, and the video output on the console itself makes this look super muddy. I'll probably boost the colors in editing so that it looks decent, but it's super dark for some reason. I'm kind of surprised. This is probably the best game I've played in this video so far. Sure, it's not incredible. It wouldn't hold a hand to any decent DDR game, but I actually found myself having fun with this one. I think the fumes are starting to get to my head. But I noticed something as soon as I started up the next song on the list, Mambo Moves. This is stock music. When I say that, I don't mean this music is so generic that it sounds like it could be stock music. No, I recognize this song. It's from the Fresh Music Library. This is literally 90s stock music. Classic Game Room used this song all the time. And now that I know what this song is, I can tell that they're literally just one-for-one transcribing these songs. Quite well, mind you, but they line up perfectly. Actually, no, they extended the song. This goes on for like 4 minutes, which is a bit extreme if you ask me. I just can't take this thing seriously anymore. You have me dancing to production stock music. And this isn't even the only time that they did this with these exact songs. While Twin Dancers was distributed by Kid Station Toys, this later wave of pads was distributed by Moose Mountain Toys, who happens to be owned by Jakks Pacific these days. Funny how that happens. But Moose Mountain also had their own line of electronic DDR-inspired toys called Dance Maker. This line mostly consisted of self-contained toys that I think allowed you to program your own dance routines, but at some point it appears that they also put out a plug-and-play console with the same branding, and when you start it up, yeah. I couldn't find any information on this thing aside from this one YouTube video, so I can't confirm any details like the release year, but to me this looks like they basically took their own generic dance mat and then had it converted with the American Idol branding. So I'd have to assume that we have Moose Mountain to thank for this wonderful song selection. I wasn't able to identify any of the other songs myself, but I wouldn't be surprised if these were all sourced from stock music CDs like Mambo Moves here. To put this in perspective, this would be like if you bought a rhythm game themed around The Voice, and all it had was stock music from Kevin MacLeod. I actually kind of want to see that now. Wait, hold on. What's this? Special feature: plug your MP3 player into the module and play with your favorite music. Yeah, if you flip this unit around, you'll find an aux cable tucked into this little groove. You flip the switch on the head unit from plug and play to aux in, and it replaces the game audio with the input from the aux. I don't have many devices that I could reach with an aux cable this short anymore, so I have to make do with YouTube on my Nintendo Switch. This is getting dumber by the second. And yep, it totally works. So, if I flip the switch... You know, considering that the charts are just random bullshit, this can actually work better than the preloaded songs depending on what you play. This feature is a lot more amusing than it should be. This may or may not have solidified my decision to buy this. I know what's playing. I'm gonna be honest, having a physical example of one of these pads has made me realize just how silly this entire concept is. I've always thought that the entire appeal of plug and plays was that they were inexpensive, provided a decent value, and above all were convenient. And I think a factor that's just as important to convenience as connectivity is ease of storage. As I look around my room right now, I can see 3 loose plug and plays that I haven't bothered to put back where they go, and I haven't bothered to put these things back because they take up minimal space and they barely get in the way. But these dance mats take up a pretty significant amount of space on the floor, I can't just leave it there. So I gotta fold up the entire thing and put it back in the box. But hold on, I need to remove the batteries first unless I want to come back to yummy corrosion when I remember that I bought this stupid thing in 4 years. And sure, you need to fold up and store a soft pad as well, but at least you have the console plugged in when you're done with the dance mat. Like, now that I have the dance mat in the box, I'm not inclined to pull it back out and stick batteries in it again. That's probably why I saw so many of these things on eBay that stated that they basically used it once with the kids and then it sat in the closet for 16 years. They're a neat novelty, but the level of quality here really makes these a bad and forgettable impulse buy in hindsight. But clearly, to some people, these things were a decent source of entertainment and they created memories. This is the case with all plug-and-plays, but I love to scroll through the comment section on YouTube for devices like these. You'll find people reminiscing about these things, or saying that they've been looking for footage for the past 18 years. These types of comments bring me so much life, and they're part of the reason that I like talking about obscure plug-and-plays so much. As silly as these things may be, they were cheap, and they gave people experiences that they may not have otherwise had. Maybe this was someone's first exposure to the rhythm game genre, and they went on to find a new hobby that they enjoyed. These things are obviously extremely low budget, effort, and overall quality, but when you're a kid, you play the hell out of whatever you have, even if it's just because of how bad it is. And I think that'd be a decent way to end off this video, but oh no, we're not done yet. I haven't talked about the most baffling license deal of all. At some point, a whole web of licensing deals was spun, and at the very center of it was a little company known as Majesco. In their heyday, this company was basically the master of budget re-releases and strange hardware revisions, like the Sega Genesis 3 and the 2000 re-release of the Game Gear. Their main contribution to the plug-and-play scene was their ability to license games from well-known brands. They continued this practice into the 2010s under the MSI Entertainment name, but in the mid-2000s they mainly collaborated with one specific company. It's a little company, you might have heard of them. They're called Konami. I touched on this a bit in my last video, but in 2004, Majesco got the license from Konami to produce Frogger and Arcade Advance plug-and-plays, which were developed by Jungle Tak. So at this point they've already established themselves in the underworld of Famiclone plug-and-plays. So in 2006, Majesco and Konami announced a pair of plug-and-plays carrying the Dance Dance Revolution license. Just like our previous specimen, these appear to have been produced by ABL, run on VT03 hardware, and presumably were developed by Wanjin. These are the official, Konami-licensed Dance Dance Revolution plug-and-plays. The first of the pair is Dance Dance Revolution's Strawberry Shortcake. I'll preface this by saying that, yet again, this is a property that I'm not particularly familiar with, but as far as I can understand, there's quite a wealth of original songs in the TV series that this serves as a tie-in for, so while this isn't based on an existing DDR entry, I think this makes a lot of sense as a tie-in for kids. Jumping into the game, we can see that the presentation is quite different from any of the previous unlicensed releases. We're given the option to play in arcade or free play mode, followed by a brief tutorial on how the game's mechanics work. From there, we're dropped into a music selection screen, which thankfully has previews unlike most of the previous releases. For some reason it always reverts back to the easiest difficulty when you change the song, which is a bit annoying. Starting up a song, and we can see more improvements. For one, we have a life meter that's actually functional. If you get the bar low enough in arcade mode, you're booted out of the song and you have to try again. None of the previous games from these developers had this function as far as I know, despite the meter always being there from the earliest games that we took a look at. Another feature carried over from proper DDR is a combo counter. It's just these small things that make this feel like a more complete experience. And the game itself is, dare I say, really fun. It's absolutely meant for kids, and the level of difficulty in the charts shows that, but the charts are actually tracked to the music for the most part. It feels like I'm actually getting in the groove with the music, which is insane coming from the previous games, which are basically timing exercises. I feel like these charts actually flowed fairly well, and on higher difficulties especially, the movements are actually pretty fun. I feel like I'm losing my mind here! And this is before I played the American Idol pad, so it can't be the fumes. Securing the license of the game they'd been imitating for 7 years really must have gotten the developers to finally pay attention. The higher difficulty levels still fall a bit low on the difficulty scale, so this probably wouldn't be much of a challenge to seasoned veterans, but I still managed to fail a couple times while using the pad. Maybe don't take any of my difficulty metrics seriously here, since I'm kind of ignoring the factor of my poor coordination. In my defense, soft pads will be soft pads, so I kept accidentally missing the down arrow while playing this one because I couldn't tell where I was standing. The music is a bit hit or miss on this one. I think these are also direct translations of the source material rather than dance remixes, which is a little bit disappointing, and some of the notes just sound a bit off-putting. A few of the tracks don't really have much going on, which I guess is accurate to the source material. I think they're all pretty catchy though, and overall, these have just about the same level of charm as most of this developer's output. Just the right amount of twang and those delightfully crunchy drums. I think I might have a problem. A lot of the visuals are obviously digitized with a ton of dithering, but I'm sure they'd look fine on a CRT. This is one of those examples of a V203 game that uses a lot of colors but doesn't go sickeningly candy-coated with its visuals, which I can always appreciate. I'd say that the visuals here are competitive with some lower-end 16-bit plug-and-play hardware. The arcade mode works, as you'd expect, like an arcade game, giving you the choice of any 3 songs and a final ranking once you're done with all 3. Free play basically behaves like any of the previous releases, where you just complete one song and then move on to the next. I can't overstate how much I appreciate elements like the life meter, combo system, and arcade mode. Elements that actually make it feel like a game. It's something that the previous releases were sorely lacking in my opinion. Even though I found the American Idol pad fairly fun despite its flaws, I still didn't spend much time with it because it would just throw me back to the menu after each song without any indication of completion or how many songs I'd played. Ironically, I'm more inclined to play for longer when systems are put in place to limit my playtime. So, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think this is actually a really good plug and play. 10 songs may seem paltry compared to the several dozens that could come on something like Hot Dance 2000, but having 10 actual songs with actual charts for multiple difficulty levels genuinely puts us well above any of their previous entries. This isn't just slightly better, it's miles ahead of their previous output. I'm genuinely impressed. So that release was announced first, but less than a week later, the second release of this duo was unveiled. This release being Dance Dance Revolution Disney Mix. Yeah, this is now the second video in a row that I've talked about Disney licensed Famiclones. I really didn't intend for this video to play out exactly like the previous one, it just sort of happened that way. Anyway, released in 2001 for the arcade and PS1, Dance Dance Revolution Disney Mix is a bizarre release consisting of fucking Eurobeat remixes of iconic Disney songs. It works way better than it has any right to. It also received a Game Boy Color port, but this plug-and-play version appears to be directly based on the PlayStation version, and doesn't share any similarities with the Game Boy Color version because, you know, that'd make too much sense. It even retains the original 2001 copyright, oddly enough. I was biting my tongue earlier, but it appears that both of these ports are heavily based on the PS1 version of Disney Mix, which features the same tutorial and general menu layout. This release only features the songs that were unique to Disney Mix, not featuring any of the externally licensed Eurobeat songs. This probably makes the most sense, and it certainly has all the songs that make this release unique, but I'm a bit disappointed that I'll never hear a rendition of Night of Fire in this engine. Just from scrolling through the songs, you can already see that the difficulty level here skews much higher than it did in the last game. They fixed the difficulty resetting as you flip between songs, which is great. It even remembers which difficulty you last played on. Thank you. Those high numbers may be promising to seasoned DDR players, and while it's definitely a bit harder, I still think it might be a bit too easy for some. Most songs above Trick were too hard for me, of course, but that's not saying much. They still have the same issue where they tend to be a bit sparse, and the quality definitely varies from track to track. There's moments where they really shine though, which leads me to wonder if they're this sparse because the engine wouldn't be able to handle more sprites on screen at a time. I think it might also be because these notes are single sprites, which are much smaller than your average DDR game. Crazy Dance, another one of their unlicensed games, used much larger notes and had a bunch on screen at a time, but it scrolled a bit slower. I didn't mention that game earlier because it didn't really fit with the rest, whoops. It has different music and doesn't seem to be using the same sound engine, so I'm not even really sure if it's by the same developers. The music and charting on this one is also shit, by the way. Anyway, while I suspect we're starting to run into some sort of limitation here, I'm grateful that they went this route anyway. If they went with newer hardware, we wouldn't have gotten these specific covers of the Disney Mix music. Oh my god, I adore these. They're actually incredible. And I don't just mean in a vacuum, I think that these genuinely fucking rock. Dance remixes really shine with the sound engine and composition style, and this is absolutely the peak of their output. One of the songs even has a few tempo shifts, and the game slows down and speeds up as needed. I'm genuinely questioning if Konami provided the charts for these licensed releases or something. They're leaps and bounds better than this developer's previous attempts, but they also don't appear to be the same as the charts in either the PS1 or GBC releases of the game. Did the developers really just lock in for these entries? Were they capable of this the entire time? I think the visuals here are also a really good use of VTO3 enhancements. They've obviously taken a massive hit compared to the PS1 version, but everything looks pleasant enough here. The characters even have a decent amount of animation frames for how large they are, although those animations are also the most obvious shortcut that they took with the presentation. The original game cleverly timed the character animations in a way that lined up with certain parts of the song. This plug-and-play version retains most of the key poses, but it simply cycles through them on a loop. I'd say that the solution works well for most of the characters, but Mickey in particular has wildly different poses for each animation, so he's just kinda going apeshit in this version. If you're gonna play any of the games featured in this video, play this one. This is probably the only one I can wholeheartedly recommend. It's obviously a lot more interesting with the dance mat, but I think Disney Mix is even fairly enjoyable on a keyboard. I doubt that it really holds a candle to the original release at all, but the level of quality is well above anything else that's been featured in this video. Strawberry Shortcake is pretty good too, but I think Disney Mix really takes the cake here. That was terrible, I'm sorry. I genuinely would have loved to see the result if the developers got the chance to make more licensed entries like this. This is probably the biggest turnaround I've ever seen from an unlicensed developer. But unfortunately, this is just about where the story ends. Konami would put out their own 16-bit plug-and-play the very next year, and most of the other brands that I mentioned would follow suit. I don't think Cheese Strings did, though. They knew when they'd peaked. At this point in time, everyone was moving on to bigger and better things, and I'm not sure if the developers lasted in this form for much longer. It's possible that they moved on to more advanced hardware like their peers, but this company is tough to track as is. So I'm not gonna burden myself with trying to figure that out. This video has already gone on for more than long enough, and I'm not about to start making miracles happen here. So that's the world of DDR Famiclones. I really didn't intend for this to go on for as long as it did, but it's really easy to get sucked into something when there's this many layers to it. Most of these games were pretty poor experiences overall, but I'd be lying if I said that I didn't enjoy my time with them. It's always fun to try something new, although I have my doubts that these games have really prepared me for the real deal. There are still a few games that I probably could have squeezed in here, but I chose to exclude. For example, Dancing Karaoke is another game from yet another unknown developer, and it bears a strong resemblance to multi-cart menus like the Arcade Action 2. Hot Dance 2020 is a homebrew game from the 2019 NES Dev competition, obviously taking inspiration from Hot Dance 2000. And that's not to mention the games that aren't dumped or can't be properly emulated, like Dai Dai Jing's Dancing Expert or the UM6578 based Mix Party 3. This one doesn't really go here, but Beaten Box is a Beat Mania clone developed by what appears to be ex-OpenCorp developers. I could go on and on and on, but this video would end up being several hours long. I'm gonna be honest, I actually don't know how long the video is at this point, so that could already be the case, and if so, I am deeply sorry. These developers really squeezed as much out of the Famicom as they possibly could, and I wouldn't want it any other way. It was, and still is, probably the most versatile piece of gaming hardware that's ever existed. Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked what you saw, maybe consider subscribing or giving this video a like. You can also directly support me on Ko-fi if you'd like. This video was a lot of work. It's actually the last video that I started work on as a college student before graduating, so any form of support is greatly appreciated. Thank you.